Okay, as we are continuing our broad theme of managing your life and ministry, it's my privilege to talk about the subject of managing your time. Oliver Burkeman wrote a book entitled 4,000 Weeks, and he begins his very first chapter by saying this: assuming you live to be 80, you'll have had about 4,000 weeks. Now, it's one thing to say you're going to be 80 years old. That seems like a long time, but when you break it down and say 4,000 weeks, that feels a little bit more sobering, doesn't it? And I made the mistake of doing the math and going, what is that in months? It's just over 900 months. If you went to your doctor next week for physical and he said, I'm sorry to break it to you, but you only have 900 months left to live. Like, you'd go, what? Wait a second. But in effect, that's what your obstetrician could tell you on your way out of the birth canal, right? This is how much time we have. 80 years sounds like a lot, but you need to go, man, 4,000 weeks, 900 months, that's sobering. That brings us in touch with our mortality fast. That's why the subtitle of this guy's book was Time Management for Mortals. And the whole premise of this book is our time is short, right? So let's make it count. Let's not give our lives to trivial things. Let's engage our life in things that are meaningful and things that matter, right? And as best I know Oliver Burkeman, I have no reason to think he's a Christian, but the emphasis of that book certainly is a Christian emphasis, is it not? You see that same concept in Scripture. James 4:14 reminds us, you are just a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes, right? The brevity of life. Because of that, the psalmist said in Psalm 90, verse 12, so teach us to number our days that we may get a heart of wisdom. Teach us to number our days, our weeks, our months. Remind us of the preciousness, the brevity, the finitude of life. Ephesians 5, Paul said, look carefully then how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise, making the best use of the time, because the days are evil. Therefore do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is. Listen, because time is short, because the days are evil, because we are engaged in a spiritual battle where nothing short of the souls of men and the glory of God is at stake, we can't live foolishly. We can't squander our time. We have to live wisely, understanding what the will of the Lord is, understanding what it is God has called us to do, and being busy doing it in effective and efficient ways. God calls us to be people who understand the brevity of life, and because of that, take seriously the importance of managing our time wisely. But let me ask you this: for how many of you does time management just come super easy? It's just a very easy, joyful thing in your life. You've got total control of your life. Okay, let's picture Pastor A. Okay, Pastor A is the guy who would say, you know what? At the end of every day, at the end of every week, man, I feel great because I've accomplished everything that I set out to do that week. I mean, every day I just knock out everything on my to-do list, and I feel completely purposeful and stress-free. Okay, that's Pastor A. Then there's Pastor B that says, man, most days I don't get half of done what I set out to do, right? And I always kind of feel a little bit off balance, a little bit behind, a little bit anxious and stressed about all the things I have to do. How many of you would say, hey, I'm Pastor A? How many of you say, I'm more often than not Pastor B, right? Now, if you're reading the average time management book, the average book on productivity, it would typically start out something like this. Are you tired? Are you stressed? Do you feel overwhelmed? And then what follows? Well, just read this book, right? Read my techniques, and guess what? You'll live a productive, stress-free life, right? David Allen wrote one of the best time management books out there. It's called Getting Things Done. Great book. But in that book, he promises that if you can just learn to adhere to his techniques, you'll be like the martial artist in a Zen state. You'll have mind like water, is what he says, right? I've never experienced that, okay? And I'm here to tell you, don't expect ever to experience that. Time management will never be easy. And here's why. A couple reasons why time management is hard. Number one, because we live in a fallen world. Okay? We do sometimes forget that, don't we? We live under this myth that somehow we can get it all done and almost like we live in paradise. We forget that when Adam and Eve sinned and they made that fateful decision to rebel against God, they were thrust from the visible, physical presence of God, and guess what? So were we. We were thrust out into a world under the curse of sin. And what was part of that curse? He said, you know what? There's going to be thorns and thistles. You're going to have to work by the sweat of your brow. Life is going to be hard. Work is going to be hard, right? And so that's normal. The fact that we are struggling to get things done, the fact that we wrestle with thorns and thistles, whether literal or metaphorical, right? The idea that work is hard, it's part of the curse. It's part of the curse. So time management will never be easy. It will always be a struggle. There's a second reason, and this one's unique to us as pastors, why time management will always be hard. It's because we're in the people business. Okay? Have any of you had that beautiful moment at the beginning of a week when you're like, I have my entire week mapped out, right? I'm going to do this on Monday, this on Tuesday, this on Wednesday, and then what happens? Tuesday morning, you get that email, you get that phone call, that drop-in, right? And the guy drops in and he says, Pastor, I just found out my wife's cheating on me. Pastor, my wife is divorcing me. Or this one, and I've gotten all these. Your administrative assistant calls you and says, Pastor, Mrs. So-and-so just found her husband dead. He shot himself. That's going to wreck your week fast, isn't it? Right? And in that moment, you don't have the luxury of going, this really isn't a good time. No, you have to deal with that. And we are in the people business. And by the way, people are not interruptions. People are ministry. That's why we exist, right? And so the best laid plans can get wrecked really fast because we're in the people business. And it's a privilege to be in the people business. That's not a distraction. That's not a diversion from what we're supposed to be doing. People are ministry, right? And so sometimes there are certain kinds of people that would look at this and say, well, because of these realities, because time management is so hard and it's so out of our control, I'm not even really going to try. I don't really try too hard to plan my time. I just kind of do whatever's next, right? Well, I would say these two things are reasons why time management is hard, but I'm going to say they're also the reason time management is necessary, right? It's necessary because we do live in a fallen world. When God said to Adam, hey, there's going to be thorns and thistles, did he say, so, you might as well just not try. You might as well not just plant any crops, just, eat whatever you can find, because thorns and thistles are going to ruin everything. No, he said, because you live in a fallen world, because you live in a sin-cursed world where there's thorns and thistles, you're going to have to work by the sweat of your brow. It's going to be that much harder because we live in a sin-cursed world. It's not a reason not to work, it's just a reality that we're going to have to work harder. We're going to have to work smarter, and farmers do that, don't they? Right? It's because of the reality of the curse, it's because of the reality that there are thorns and thistles that never go away, that farmers have invented things like irrigation and pesticides and combines and harvesters and tools and technology because they realize to get ahead of this fallen world, you've got to work harder and smarter, right? And that's the reality. If we're going to manage our time, given the realities of a fallen world, we have to be smart about it. We have to work hard, but that's just the reality of living in a fallen world. Secondly, the reason we need to give attention to time management is because we are in the people business, right? It is because we want to make time for people. The reality is, when those unexpected interruptions, if you want to call them that, occur, your administrative stuff doesn't go away that week, does it? You still have to preach that Sunday. You still have to lead your staff. There are still other things that have to happen in the midst of those difficult people moments. And if you haven't been thinking ahead, if you haven't been planning ahead, those difficult people moments aren't just going to be difficult, they're going to be devastating, right? But if you can get into healthy rhythms of thinking ahead and planning and using your time wisely, then you'll have a little bit of space to deal with those difficult moments, and they will be difficult, no two ways about it, but they won't wreck your world, right? And so this is why we need to give attention to time management. Now, this challenge of speaking on time management is in itself a challenge because as I've struggled with this thing called time management, and I've tried to find resources that are helpful, sometimes I find them they fall into one of two extremes. On the one hand, some time management resources are so theoretical and high-level conceptual, and especially Christian books on time management can be so theological where it talks about we're here to give glory to God and for doing good works and all this, and that's great. I believe all of that, but sometimes I read those books and I'm like, yeah, but I need to get things done on Monday. Like, how does that wonderful truth change? I need tools. I need some practical help for actually getting stuff done, right? On the other hand, sometimes I read resources or watch videos and they're so specific, like they're so unique and specific and tied to the way one particular guy thinks that there's no way I can do that because that's not the way I think, right? And that's the challenge that I'm up against here. So the approach I'm going to take here is I'm going to share some of the processes that have worked for me, but I'm going to try to do it in the context of principles, broad principles that hopefully you can apply. So I'm not saying that the way I do things or that the process I'm sharing is the only way or a God-inspired way. Hopefully you can find it helpful. Maybe you will find it helpful, but there are principles underlying these processes that hopefully you can apply to your unique situation. So I'm also not going to be tool specific. I'm not going to talk about technology or apps or this or that. What I'm going to give you is a process that is simple enough that you could do it with nothing but a yellow legal pad, okay? If that's all you had, you could do it. Now, if there's time, maybe I will talk about some of the tools and the apps and things that I've found helpful, but I want to keep this helpful for whatever your state of life is and whatever your technological savvy is. So, with that in mind, some of you who've been around the Free Church for a while are familiar with the intentional living concept, right? We've heard this in a number of contexts. Most recently, my predecessor, Bob Rowley, taught it, and if you haven't seen it, it's on our YouTube channel. But in this intentional living course, they encourage us to adopt various healthy rhythms. We talk about abandoning annually. That's sort of our prayer and planning retreat. We get away once a year. We talk about measuring monthly. That's a leadership clarity day. When again, once a month for half a day or a full day, you get away and just kind of regroup and rethink things. Withdraw weekly. That's sort of your Sabbath rest. And then you're diverting daily. That's your quiet time or some space that you have, at some point each day. Now, these are healthy rhythms that the Free Church has encouraged us to adopt, and I've adopted this kind of thing, and it's really helpful. It's good stuff. Oftentimes, these healthy rhythms are promoted in the concept of getting rest, right? You need to recharge, you need to rest, and that's absolutely important. That's the benefit of these things. But I would say, when you're stressed, when you're anxious, you need rest, but you probably also need to get some things done. Because what is it that's creating some of that anxiety? All those open loops, all that stuff that's not getting done. And so I'm going to say these annual rhythms, these healthy rhythms can be used not only for rest, but also to think strategically about our time. And what I'm going to talk to you about is a process that you'll see, I think, dovetails nicely with these healthy rhythms that we've been talking about here in the Free Church. So let's jump into this here. Peter Drucker is famous for saying efficiency is doing things right. Effectiveness is doing the right things, okay? And the goal is not just efficiency. You could be really efficient in the course of a day and have this big, long to-do list and check off everything in that to-do list. But the question is, were the things on that to-do list really purposeful? Were they really meaningful? Were they strategic? Yeah, you got a lot done, but were they good things? Were they really the most important things you should get done, right? And so that's his point. Efficiency is doing things right. It is getting things done quickly, but effectiveness is doing the right things. And so before we talk about, how you can get a lot done, I think you need to back up and go, what should we be getting done? How do we prioritize? How do we decide the things that belong on that to-do list? And so really our goal is to be both effective and efficient. And to be effective, you must first of all determine your priorities, okay? That's the doing the right things. That's the what. So to be effective, number one, determine your priorities. And then to be efficient, you must develop your plan. And this is the doing things right. This is the how. So we want to talk both about what and how. Doing the right things and doing those things right. So again, 2 steps, determine your priorities and develop your plan. And that's sort of the 2-point outline of my talk here. So let's talk about determining your priorities. I'm going to suggest, and this is just my rhythm, and you can take it and adapt it or tweak it or pitch it all together, but I'm going to suggest that you do a semi-annual prayer and planning retreat. So whereas the Free Church says abandon annually, I might say abandon semi-annually, right? For me, just doing this once a year was never quite enough. I needed to rest a little bit more often than that. And planning 12 months out was just a little too much sometimes for me. So I typically did this about twice a year. And I would say this, get away for at least 2 days if you can. If you just do one day, it is a getaway, you're going somewhere, you'll barely have gotten to where you're going, you'll barely have gotten unpacked, you'll barely have gotten into a headspace where you're ready to be productive, and then it's almost time to go. So give yourself a couple days, a little buffer on each side where that middle space can be productive. I would say this, book a guest speaker for the following Sunday. When I was a pastor, there was always a little bit of my resident memory that was devoted to sermon. It was always going. It was always spinning back there. And I knew Sunday was coming. I was always thinking about that sermon, right? And what you want to do when you're spending time really thinking bigger thoughts is give your head some space to set that stuff aside. You don't have to think about a sermon this Sunday. You can actually think about something a little further down the road in a little bigger picture. So I would say when you have these retreats, just go ahead and book a speaker for the following Sunday so that you really can devote your time and your energy and your mental space to thinking bigger thoughts. I would say this, for me personally, I found the best times to do this were after your fall kickoff and after Easter. Here's why. For me, if I try to do this in August, for instance, what's coming right at the end of August? Everything, right? Your fall kickoff. People are coming back from summer vacations. You're starting small groups. You're kicking off a new children's ministry. You're probably doing a new sermon series. You've got maybe a fall festival. You've got a lot of, it's kind of that fall push, right? And so I always found, again, I couldn't really focus on things because I knew that stuff was coming. I'd wait till I got on the other side of that push. And usually sometime between mid-October and mid-November, I would find a couple days to get away because that was after the fall push, but before your kind of holiday push, right? Kind of a nice in-between time. I found that was a good time when I could really let myself think about other things. If you need ideas for places to go, check our district website. We have ideas of locations throughout our district where you can get either inexpensive or free getaways for pastors. I'll tell you what, my favorite one recently has been this place right here. There's a little lake house on the cabin there, and I love it. It's not cheap, or it's not free rather. It's a discounted rate for pastors, but like I'll sit in that cabin, I'll do work, look out, see the beautiful lake, and then when I get a little brain fried, I'll step out, 2 steps outside onto the dock and throw a line in, right, and catch a bass. Okay, go back to work, right? But I just love that. And I know every trail on this property, right? I'll just walk and think and pray, and that's what you want to do. You want to find a place where you can walk, where you can pray, where you can think. There's something incredibly rejuvenating of getting outdoors in a space like this, right? Where you can walk around and see nature and breathe some fresh air. Find a place like that where you can even talk out loud and nobody will hear you. You can talk to the Lord, think out loud. It's just a good place, a good space to do that. What are you trying to do at this semi-annual prayer and planning retreat? I'm going to suggest that among other things, but this is what you want to do, determine your objectives, key results, and initiatives. And if you're familiar with some time management, productivity stuff, this isn't unfamiliar to you, but let me explain to you what it is. And by the way, afterwards, I've got handouts that kind of summarize some of this so we can hand this stuff out here. But let me describe objectives, key results, and initiatives. Objectives are significant, broad, clearly defined goals. Again, right now we're going, hey, not doing the to-do list, but what belongs on the to-do list? So you think very high level, very, very high level, significant, broad, clearly defined goals. Okay, these are not SMART goals, if you know that language. Specific, measurable, actionable, relevant, and time-bound. These are not specific. They're broad. They're by design broad. So you're going, what are the big, broad things that I need to focus on in the next 6 months? Okay, this is a semi-annual retreat. Okay, then you're going, hey, okay, if I were to pursue these objectives, what are the key results? These are measurable success criteria used to track the achievement of the goals. So if I want to pursue this broad objective, and we'll give examples in a minute, but this broad objective, what would that look like? Tangibly, practically, specifically. If I were to achieve this broad goal, what would be some key indicators that I'm succeeding here? And then you want to translate to the next step and go, okay, what are some initiatives? These are specific action steps that produce the key results. So if I want to pursue these broad objectives, and that's going to look like these key results, then what steps will get me to these key results? Okay, now let me just give a little bit more flesh to these bones. How do you determine your objectives? I would say on these kinds of retreats, I always try to think both in terms of my personal life and my ministry life. And I would say try to set 3 to 5 objectives for both your personal life and your ministry life. And when you're asking this question about your personal life, you say things like this. What are the top 3 to 5 things that if I accomplish them in the next 6 months would make the greatest positive impact on my spiritual growth as a follower of Christ? By the way, these don't need to be overtly spiritual things. This could be, I really need to improve my physical health, right? That may be the thing that will allow you to give greater glory to God with your life, right? That may be a very broad objective that you need to pursue. And it's very broad. It's not very specific, but that's a big, broad objective. It might be, I need to spend more time with my wife, right? That may be one thing. I need to disciple my kids better, right? It may be something like that. For your ministry, what are the top 3 to 5 things that if we accomplish them in the next 6 months would make the greatest positive impact on our church's ability to effectively accomplish its mission of making disciples? Okay? And again, these may be overtly spiritual, or they could be something as simple as we really need to reduce our debt. That's an obstacle to us being all God wants us to be. We really need to improve our curb appeal. Our building's looking a little crummy. We need a new sign. We need some of that. Or it may be something a little more directly. We need to really strengthen our small group ministry. We really need to strengthen our hospitality ministry. We really need to do a better job of writing a discipleship curriculum. But what are those 3 to 5 big, broad objectives that if you accomplish them in the next 6 months would really move the ball forward for you personally as a Christian and collectively for you as a church? Now, it takes a little time to think about that. If you had to narrow it down to just say 3 things, that's going to focus you a bit, isn't it? And that's where it's just helpful to walk and think and pray and really just give some time to spend some time in the presence of God, really asking that question and thinking about that. But that's time well spent, that thinking time. Okay? Then you want to say, hey, what are the key results that will give evidence that we're moving in that direction? Here you're saying, okay, for each of those objectives, what are the 3 to 5 conditions that would need to be met in order for this objective to be accomplished? What will this look like if it actually happens, specifically, measurably? We'll give some examples here. And then finally, what are the initiatives, specific actions that will get us there? Again, we can talk in theory, but let's look about some real examples. Let's suppose one of your personal objectives is, I need to improve my physical health. Okay? That's a nice, beautiful, broad objective. But what would be some indicators that that's actually happening? What would be some key results that would give indication that, hey, my health is improving? Well, you could say, I'm going to set some goals here for my weight. I've been pushing 200 pounds. It's time for me to get down to about 170. That would be a good key result that would give an objective indicator of health. My body mass index, I want to get down to 22 or whatever, I'm trying to get my cholesterol under 200. I've been pumping up a little bit. The doctor's been on me about that. These are some things that are objective, measurable goals. Now, if you achieve these 3 things, does that mean you're perfectly healthy? Is that a guarantee of health? No. But are these pretty good indicators of health? If you're at 200 and you get down to 170, is that probably a good indicator of progress towards this goal? Yeah. And so you're looking for something that you can measure by. Now, it's not enough to have these goals. The next step is, hey, how do I achieve these results, right? And what specific action steps could I take to achieve these key results? Well, you might say, I'm going to try to walk 10,000 steps a day. I'm going to get me a Fitbit or a smartphone or whatever, and I'm going to make it my goal to walk 10,000 steps a day. Maybe lift 3 times a week, whatever. I'm going to engage in intermittent fasting. I'm only going to eat between 1 o'clock and 6 o'clock or whatever it is. That's kind of the thing now. I'm going to limit fried foods, man. We eat out a lot, so I'm going to say only once a week can I indulge in maybe some good fried food. I'm going to sleep 8 hours, right? Now, you could add to these things, but the point is, if you do these things consistently, is there a pretty good chance you might actually hit some of these key results? Yeah. So this isn't rocket science, but it is being intentional, going, hey, what are the big things that I think should happen in my life and my ministry? What will that look like if it happens? And what are some concrete steps I can take to get there? Now, here's another example in ministry. Let's say your broad objective is we need to strengthen our small groups ministry. Okay? Well, what would that look like for you? Well, it could look like a number of things. You could say, well, you know what? We'd love to see. Right now, we've only got about 40% of our people are in small groups. They don't really value small groups. They're not really engaged. They're not really experiencing the benefit of it. We'd love to see that number at 80%. We'd love to see 80% of our church members, regular attenders, involved in small groups. That's just a goal to shoot for. It's not, a divine number, but that's a good indicator of health for us. We think it would be. Okay, well, what might we do to move in that direction? Well, you might say, we really haven't done a good job talking about the value of community and the value of one another. So maybe it's time we do some teaching on that, right? A sermon isn't the answer to everything, but it's a help, right? So we're going to do a sermon series on the importance of community and engaging. And that sermon series will culminate with a small group sign-up Sunday where we'll highlight our small group leaders. Maybe we even have them in the lobby and they can meet them and sign up. And so we're going to give greater visibility and greater value through a sermon series and conjunction sign-up. But what about those people that aren't there on that particular Sunday? Well, let's make it as easy as possible. Let's create online registration, right? And what about, we need to raise the value of small groups for our new membership process. And so as we teach our new members class, we really emphasize that. And when we have new member interviews, when the elder or the pastor is interviewing new families, we're going to learn a little bit about them, where they live, how many kids they have, that sort of thing. And based on that, we're going to recommend one of our small groups to them. And not only that, we're going to have that small group leader place a personal phone call and give them an invitation to try to make that connection. And then what about those guys that they just aren't in our small groups? You should have a roster of that, right? As you look at your regular attenders and members. Maybe you could go through that roster and say, hey, who's not meaningfully involved in a small group? And say, hey, what would be a good fit for them? If we were to, nudge them into a small group, would there be one of our small groups that would be a good fit? If so, let's give that name and that number to that small group leader and have them extend a personal invitation, right? Now, these are concrete things that you're doing to help move in the direction of greater involvement, right? Now, will these things guarantee that? No, but are these steps directly related to a good key result like that? Do you think you'll move the ball forward if you did some things like that? Yeah. Again, it's just, let's suppose you said, hey, if we had 80% involvement, we wouldn't have nearly enough groups, so we really need we need at least 3 more new groups. What do? Well, You might say, well, let's brainstorm some small group leaders. Who could be potential small group leaders? Okay. Well, what do we do with them? Well, we don't really have a training process, so let's think about developing a training curriculum for small group leaders. And let's create an apprenticing model where each potential small group leader can be linked up with an existing small group leader and serve with them for a time, and they share the reins of leadership. And then let's have a plan for how we launch new groups. And of course, you might have a list that's more detailed than this, but you see the kind of thinking we're encouraging here, right? It's intentional, process-oriented thinking. And so often, what do? We just kind of bounce around through life like pinballs. We just kind of do the next thing or the whatever the program is we've done in the past. Hey, this is the time we do a fall festival. Well, let's do it again, right? And we don't really think intentionally about where does God have us in this season at this point in time to move the ball forward strategically for who we are. And what this process does is it helps make sure that the things that are on your to-do list are unique and purposeful and strategic for that particular season of your life and your ministry, right? And it is a way where you bring your life before God and you just walk and talk and think and pray and say, God, where would you have me go this time, right? And over time, as you think about that, pray about that, discuss it with others, you can begin identifying these things, okay? Now, you don't have a plan yet, do you? Right? This hasn't really been connected to any kind of calendar or any kind of system, but if you did nothing but this, if this is all you took away, my guess is some of us would be way more productive, wouldn't we? Because we're being intentional. We are actually thinking at different points in our life, where does God want me to be right now? And what are the big things I can pursue? Right? And if you have 500 things, none of them are going to get done. Narrow it down. Say, I'm going to give full attention to 3 or 4 big things right now, and I'm going to give my heart and my soul to these things, and we're going to push hard on these things. Yeah? It's just being purposeful, okay? So this is determining your priorities. This is make sure that before you try to do things right, you're doing the right things. Right? And so this is how you begin determining the things that should be done. And as you develop this list of initiatives, you're beginning to develop a to-do list of sorts, right? So you're determining your priorities. Secondly, though, then, you need to develop a plan. It's great to have all these things on a big open list somewhere, but how do we execute? How do we actually make sure these things happen? I'm going to encourage you to do 3 things, and we'll explain some principles within each of these. And if you've read anything on time management or productivity, these will not be new concepts, but they will be good reminders. These are always good reminders for me. Number 1, build your to-do list. Number 2, batch your tasks. Number 3, block your time. Okay? I mentioned David Allen. He has written a great little book called Getting Things Done, The Art of Stress-Free Productivity. I might argue that there is really no such thing as stress-free productivity. We talked about that. But he is absolutely right that many times we generate needless stress for us because we live our lives with just open loops, just all kinds of things that are out there in our heads that we've never really corralled and so he says this, the mind is for having ideas, not for holding them. And he's right. Much like a computer. Computers are amazing at computing, right? Getting work done. But if you clutter that computer up with too much stuff, if you have too many internet tabs open, or if you have multiple apps running, or if you're trying to do, it's going to clutter the RAM and the computer's not going to be able to do what it's best at doing. And that's David Allen's point is listen, our minds are great at coming up with ideas, solving problems, doing creative, beautiful, wonderful things, right? Thinking deep thoughts. That's what our minds were made for. But if we are adding to that, okay, I have to remember these 500 different things that I need to do. And you're going to live constantly with stress because you're going to be, what am I forgetting? What am I forgetting? Oh, did I do that? Did I do that? So the point is, capture all your tasks in a single master to-do list. Get them out of your head and on paper or in a document or whatever you do. But just get, and so that's what I would say is, number 1, take a morning, take an afternoon, whatever, and just sit down if you want with a piece of paper and a yellow pad, a pen, or a Word document or whatever. Or if you have some project management software, do that. But just start listing on all the things that you need to do. And on that list should be some of those initiatives that we talked about tied to your key results. But there will be other things too. There are things we have to do, right? Just get it all out of your head and on paper, right? And there's something very stress relieving about doing that. Because I'm no longer having to remember, okay, did I forget to do that or did that? And this master to-do list will be a living, breathing document. Unlike the Bible, unlike the Constitution, this is something that will constantly be added to and changed. And as you think of new things, you add it to that list, right? Get it out of your head and onto paper. That is a stress-relieving practice. When you think about physical things, sometimes my office gets kind of cluttered. And you know what I do? I'll take every piece of paper, every random object, every bill, every whatever, and I just pull it all together in one big fat pile in the middle of my desk. And there's something that's kind of liberating about that, because I can see there are actually clear spaces in my office. This is what my office could look like, right? If I got through this thing, and it's all in one place, and so you can just kind of deal with it. You just work through that pile, right? That's the concept here, is just get it out of the crevices, get it out of the corners of your mind, get it on paper. So build your to-do list. Now, as you do this, I would say, as you build it, always attach an action verb at the beginning of the to-do. So don't put on your list, for instance, small group leaders. In that moment, you may remember exactly what you're thinking there, but later on you're going to go, am I supposed to call the small group leaders, or recruit small group leaders, or train small group leaders, or fire my small group leaders? What am I supposed to do with this, right? So always add an action verb, and what you're doing is you're taking that mental pressure off yourself. You don't want to think hard about things. Just make it very clear what you need to do. And sometimes the reason you put it in those vague terms is you really haven't thought about what the next step is. You don't know what the action verb is. So take the time to think about it. What is that step? So create a list. Now, on one level, that will be very liberating, very stress relieving. But another level, it will also add another level of overwhelm, because you'll see all the things you have to do, right? That list could easily number 50, 100, 200 items. And so at that point, you're not only coming in contact with your mortality, you're coming in contact with your finitude, right? The fact that you are a finite, limited creature, that you can't do it all, right? And you're going to realize, I can't, nor should I probably do all of these things. And here is a crucial principle of time management: get more done by doing less, right? It's interesting, in the middle of the last century, there were a lot of futurists that were talking about how technology would change the experience of the future modern man. And that modern man's in the 21st century, their greatest problem would be trying to figure out how they would spend all the extra time that technology had bought them, right? Now, it's laughable, but they're actually right. Technology has created lots of extra time for us. It's done a lot of things quickly that we didn't have to do before, and they would have been right. We would have had all this extra time in our hands if we had been content to live the same kind of lifestyle and do the same number of tasks that we were doing in the 1950s, right? But we don't do that, right? Because technology is a double-edged sword. It not only gets things done more quickly, it allows you to do more things. And technology doesn't solve the problem. It just allows you to do things faster and do more of them. And so the reality is, at some point you have to go, no, enough is enough, right? Like, I have to stop somewhere. I have to limit this list to things that I can actually do. And so what I'm going to say is you really need to capture all those tasks in a master to-do list, and then narrow that list down. You got to go, I can't do all this. And you do that through 4 things: elimination, automation, delegation, prioritization. Elimination, okay? You'll look at that list and you'll say, do I really have to do everything on this list? If I only have 4,000 weeks, do I want to give some time to that? And you might be, well, like, maybe I'd like to do that someday. Okay, great. Take it off that list and put it on a someday maybe list, right? Just get it off your to-do list, but narrow that list down to the things that actually do need to be done. Not just the someday maybe, but the things that need to be done. So you can eliminate some items just because they don't need to be done. Number 2, automation, right? And this is where technology will help you. If you're still one of those guys that is still paying bills by writing a check and pulling out an envelope and licking a stamp, and that's time-consuming stuff. Just stop. Just don't do that. You don't have to do that anymore, right? There's this thing called bill pay and auto pay, right? Where you don't even have to think about it, right? You get an email, you can check it if you need to, but that stuff just goes automatically out the door, right? I ran into one just recently. I bought a new printer, and the printer. Have you ever had the experience when your printer runs out of ink? And you never know until you're printing that very important document, right? And then you're like doing a scramble. Is Walmart open? Is Target open? It's 11 o'clock at night, and you spend an hour running around town. Well, this new printer that I not only indicates, it gives you a little pop-up, hey, your ink is getting a little bit low, but there's also a button that says, would you like to buy some new ink? And I can just hit that button, yes, and boom, ink gets sent to me, and I have it a week before I need it, and there we go. I've saved myself an hour and a lot of stress, right? That's the kind of thing. There are a lot of things in our life right now that can just be automated. Amazon services, grocery delivery, all those kinds of things, and some of them are just free of charge. Use those, right? That'll save you time. That's time you can spend on better things. The last 2, delegation and prioritization. I want to just talk a little bit about these. Delegation. Okay, you're in this room, most of us, because we're pastors, okay? As pastors, we have been given a unique calling and a unique gifting. We are shepherds. What do shepherds do? They lead their flock, they feed their flock, and they protect their flock. Okay? So there are certain things that you, and really only you, can or should do for your congregation. Think about it. What does it mean to lead your flock? It means to do the kind of thinking that we talked about here, right? We're not just doing ministry on the ground. We're getting at the 40,000 foot saying, okay, what are the strategic opportunities that we as a church should pursue in order to bring maximum glory to God in this community? What are the crying needs in our community that we really should think about meeting, right? How can I help cast vision and move this flock forward for the glory of God? Those aren't the kind of big questions that the nursery workers are going to be asking. Those aren't the kind of big questions that guys in your lawn crew are going to be asking, nor should they. That's your job, right? Think about, what does it mean to feed your sheep? Most of you have more spiritual maturity and biblical training and biblical knowledge than the average person in your church. You are uniquely qualified and gifted to feed God's people a well-balanced diet of spiritual truth in the way that you preach and teach. That's something you can do that other people can't do, at least not in the way you can and have been called to do it, right? What does it mean to protect your flock? It means you're going to be asking questions like this. Hey, how's the unity of our church right now? What's undermining that? How's the morale of our team right now? How are they doing? How's the theological integrity of our church, right? You're asking those big questions because you're a shepherd. You want to protect those things, right? Now, those are things, big picture, high-level things that God has called you as shepherds, and really only you as shepherds, you and your elders, to do. And every minute that you're tweaking the website and doing graphic design and unplugging toilets and pulling weeds is time away from the things that God has called you to do. Now, does that sound arrogant? Some of you are going, wait a second. Am I too good to pull weeds? Am I too good? No. But remember Acts 6, the apostles said, it would not be good for us to wait tables because we've been called to the ministry of the word and to prayer. They weren't saying that because they were too good to do those things. They were saying that because they recognized God had called them to something unique and something important, right? And there were others that could do some of those other things. So don't be so good that you can't show up for a work day. Pastors, do that. We need to get our hands dirty. We need to put in some sweat equity. And yes, do that. But realize that's not our primary calling. And it's easy for us to get distracted with that kind of stuff. And when we do that, not only are we pulling away from the things God's called us to do, and that's going to hurt your church if you're not fulfilling your role as a shepherd. But the other thing is, you're robbing other people of opportunities to do those things. Remember the book of Ephesians. Our job is not to do the work of the ministry, it's to equip the saints to do the work of the ministry, right? Don't rob other people of the opportunities to serve. Those things that seem very mundane, those are great opportunities for people to use simple gifts and to serve and find entry-level ways into ministry. And people will only step up when you step back. I learned this, right? As pastor for 21 years, I began to, over time you collect things on your plate that probably shouldn't be there, and you do some things that you probably shouldn't do, and it'd be easier to, and then what happens? Unexpectedly, I had a career change. I'm suddenly district superintendent, and you know what happened when I stepped away? Miraculously, other people stepped in and did those things that I thought nobody else would do, right? And people will only step up when you step back. So strategically step back. Follow the 80% rule. What that means, if there are things on your to-do list that are not central to your role as a pastor, if you can find somebody who can do them at least 80% as well as you can, get rid of them. Let them do it. That's going to be hard for those of us that are perfectionists because we could do it better. We could do it more effectively. Yeah, but in the long run, you're going to hurt yourself in the church. So follow that 80% rule. You want to make the shift from doing to delegating to developing. This is a talk in and of itself. But there are times, especially if you're starting a church, you'll have to do more than you'd like to do. That's just the reality, right? But you want to very quickly shift from doing tasks to delegating those tasks to others. And then another big shift is when you start developing people who you're not just giving them tasks, you're giving them meaningful responsibility. You're replicating yourself in them, right? And that's ministry, right? That's 1 Timothy 2:12 stuff, right? So again, we could say more, but my point is, as you look at the big long to-do list, ask yourself, how many of these items are central to my role as pastor? And find as many of them as you can to begin delegating. And maybe you need to add to your to-do list, I need to delegate, whereas it said before, do the website, put the word delegate in front of that. I need to delegate this, right? And figure out a plan for doing that. So anyway, you narrow that list down to the things that are important, to things that are strategic by delegation. Fourthly, by prioritization. I'm going to encourage you to prioritize by time horizons. And you can pick your own, but I would say start maybe with this month, this week, and today. Okay? So every day, and then what we also say is decide on your big three for each horizon. And here's what that looks like. Every month, when you have your Leadership Clarity Day, right? What you want to do is let me go back and look at those objectives and key results and initiatives. You don't want to come up with those great lists and then tuck them away in a file folder somewhere. You want to revisit them regularly. So every month you're looking at those going, hey, how am I making progress? What can I do to move the ball forward in these things? You're looking at your master to-do list and you're going, okay, what are the things on this list that really need to get done this month? Okay? And you create a list for this month. You do the same thing every week. Every week you go, hey, how are we doing on those objectives and key results? And on that monthly to-do list, right, what do I need to do this week? You create a list for that week. And then every day, right? You won't get everything done every day, so you're revisiting this every day. Hey, how am I doing? What did I not get done yesterday? Okay, I'm going to create a new list for tomorrow, right? And with each of those time frames, you're asking the question, what are my big three? Okay? So every month, you say, if I got nothing else done this month, what are the big three projects that if I got these things done, okay, I'm at least going to survive. We're going to move the ball forward. It'll still be strategic. That gives you a sense of priority. Because if you only have a list of 50 things and you don't give them some priority, you may not get the most important things done. But that big three is a real liberating principle because at least you're getting the things done that are strategic. Every week you do the same thing. Here's my list for this week. What are the big three? If I could only get 3 things done this week, what would be the 3 most important things that will be most strategic in moving the ball forward, especially on those high-level objectives? And then every day, right? I've got a lot of things I need to do today, but if I only get 3 things done, what are those 3 things? And what are you doing? You're taking this unwieldy 500-point list, but you're giving it some priority, you're giving it some definition, you're making it manageable, okay? But it does require that you do it on a regular basis, okay? So build your to-do list, but narrow that down. You can't do it all. Narrow it down through elimination, automation, delegation, and prioritization. Prioritization won't take things off your list, but it might take things off your list for today. You'll begin prioritizing things. Okay. Secondly, you need to batch your tasks. A lot of us multitask a lot, right? We may not try, but we end up doing a lot of multitasking. So for instance, you'll say, hey, I'm going to do sermon prep. And so you'll go to your study and you'll sit down at your computer and you open up Logos in your Bible or whatever you have, but you leave your door open and you leave your email notifications on and you leave your phone ringer on. And then you're like, you know what? I think I could listen to a podcast while I'm doing this. So you turn a podcast on, and invariably what happens then, the staff member comes in with a cute little meme, is like, did you see this pastor? This is hilarious. Oh, that's good, And then the email notification pops up, and you're like, hey, that looks important. Maybe I better check on this. And then the phone rings, and you're like, oh, okay. How much are you getting done? Like, not much, because you're not focused. And sometimes we think we can multitask. Sometimes we think we can do multiple things. You know what? Research has shown there's really no such thing as multitasking. You can't, multitasking is impossible for conscious activities. And the reason I say conscious activities is because it is possible for me, for instance, to be breathing and teaching at the same time. But I'm not consciously doing that, right? That's an unconscious, mechanism. But if you're doing something and listening to something and what you're actually doing is you're doing task switching. You're rapidly switching concentration from one thing to the next. That's really what you're doing. And here's the thing. There's been research that's been done on this recently. It generally takes 15 minutes of uninterrupted work to get into a state of flow. And you've probably seen this, right? Man, you get in the office, you don't have the right headspace, but you force yourself, and then finally I'm in. And you're thinking good thoughts, and you're moving forward. It takes about 15 minutes to get into a state of flow. But listen, it can take up to 25 minutes to refocus on a task after an interruption. Think about how unproductive that is. One interruption, it doesn't take you another 15 minutes. It takes you more time to get back into that state of flow. And so each task switch might only cost you 1/10 of a second in terms of the actual switch, but in reality, they can add up to loss about 40% of your time in the course of a day. Okay, so think about that. So what's the solution? The solution is what we call batching your tasks and blocking your time. What is batching your tasks? Well, think about batch your similar tasks on your to-do list together into similar lists, okay? So there are some things that are simple tasks. Change the light bulb. Take out the garbage. These aren't part of a broader project. They're one-and-done things. They're very simple tasks. They take no real mental energy. It's just there's things like that. You just put them on a simple task list. Contacts, emails. going through my email, purging email, replying to email, sending email. Phone calls, there's certain phone calls that I need to make and reply and return to, right? So contacts, that's a kind of task. Appointments, these are meetings, these are things on your calendar. Errands, these are things that you need to do away from the office or away from your home. You got to go on a trip to do these things. Different administrative tasks. Thinking and deciding. This is an important one, but we don't really put it on the list. There are sometimes we're not ready to put a to-do item on our list because we haven't yet decided what that task is, right? I don't yet know what I need to do there because I need to think about that some. And maybe there's a decision I need to make before I can really take action. So maybe there's some to-do items on your list that need to say, think about this. Decide this, right? And that's a kind of headspace that, to thinking and deciding are similar kinds of things. Teaching and writing. Right? If you're writing a sermon, if you're writing a discipleship curriculum, that's a kind of task. And then scheduling. There's a lot of things that oftentimes I'll find myself going, I need to do this, but really I need to find a time to put that on the calendar and schedule that. So that's another kind of thing. Now, what you'll notice is each of these different groups, they all require a different level of mental energy and a different kind of headspace, right? You're going to be in a different kind of headspace changing a light bulb than you will be doing sermon prep, right? It's a different way of thinking. You're going to be in a different headspace just running errands, getting gas and such, than you will be thinking and deciding and making big decisions. And so the idea here is you want to batch these kinds of things together. Here's what this looks like practically. Let's pretend you've got a legal pad here. This is your to-do list, okay? So this is this week's tasks, or at least it's an excerpt from that. Got a lot of different things on there. And again, you're just brainstorming. Schedule lunch with Tom, call Joe regarding the fall festival plan, write up staff performance reviews, think about my fall objectives and key results, finalize my sermon outline, plan my fall preaching calendar, pick up the groceries, get the oil changed, draft the elder retreat agenda, schedule the Johnsons' premarital counseling, reply to John regarding his baptism question. I mean, the list could go on. This is the kind of stuff we find on our list as pastors. Now, at the beginning of your week, you're going to look at that list and you're going to go, hey, if I could only get 3 things done this week, right, what would be the most strategic things? And there I put a star next to those. I might say, you know what, this week I really need to write up some staff performance reviews. I really need to plan my fall preaching calendar. Man, I'm going to be in trouble if I don't get that marked out. And I really need to update our leadership pipeline. It's a little bit outdated. We really need to rethink that a little bit. If I can get those things done, man, that's going to move the ball forward for us, right? So this is what you do. But then there's another thing you do. You say, what category do these tasks belong to? And you start listing them by category. Schedule lunch with Tom. Well, that's a scheduling thing. Call Joe about the fall festival. That's a contact. Write up staff performance reviews. That's admin. Think about fall objectives and key results. That's thinking and deciding, right? Finalize my sermon outline. That's teaching and writing. Pick up groceries. That's an errand. And you begin categorizing them. And why do you do that? Because then the next step is you reframe your list in terms of these categories. You put all your contacts together under one list. You put all your errands under one list. You put all your admin under one list. And why do you do that? Because it's more productive. It's more efficient. If the course of a day, in the morning you get an oil change and then later in the day you go pick up your groceries, you could do that in one trip, right? You could do that in one trip and save yourself probably 30, 40 minutes at least. So you're trying to batch your items together. And the other thing is, when you're in a particular kind of headspace, to switch out of that into a different context, again, it's terribly inefficient. So when you're in thinking and deciding mode, just block out a chunk of time and make some big decisions, right? When you're in creative mode, spend some time teaching, writing your sermon outline, doing that kind of thing. Just don't be jumping from thing to thing, right? Now, for this to work, you not only need to batch your tasks, but then you need to block that time out on your calendar. You need to create buckets in your weekly calendar for these things to happen. So for instance, look at this one right here, the list of things in the center. This is somebody's imaginary day. I need to create a client proposal. I need to do email and messages, spend a little time on social media, do lunch, do some meetings, prep for tomorrow. Now on the far left here is what most people do. This is how they tackle their day, right? And look at that. They're spending a little bit of time on email in the morning, then they're spending a little bit of time on that client proposal, they're jumping into social media, they're having a meeting, they're boom, 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 in and out and in and out. You can see how, just looking at visually, how unproductive it is. Versus that next time blocking option, where you say, I'm going to just block out a time where I do nothing but that client proposal, right? And I'm in that headspace and I can focus on that and I can just get that thing done without being interrupted 5 different times. And then I'm going to have lunch and then I'm going to spend a little bit of time on social media and I'm going to try to lump my meetings together, so I'm not just jumping back and forth. And can you see how this works, okay? So you want to block your time on your calendar. And let me give you some suggestions in this respect. So the idea here is plan your week in big blocks of time, 2 to 4 hours. All right, that's what I would say, 2 to 4 hours, focused on one task or one type of task at a time. And just as you map out your week, just blocks of time, and you're still going to be doing everything, but you're just going to do the same kinds of things in those blocks of time. Here's some things to keep in mind as you do that. Dale Burke wrote a great little book called Less is More Leadership. He's a former Free Church pastor. He suggests that we think about our schedule in 4 important time blocks: rest, results, response, and refocus. And I think this is pretty good. This will achieve, I think, a really nicely balanced life. Rest. And what we don't mean by rest is sleep. Okay, that's a different category. What we mean is your health, kind of the stuff that Justin talked about earlier. Physical fitness, your spiritual life, your marriage, your family, relationships, right? This is what we mean when we talk about rest. It's the kind of stuff that's easily neglected, but is very important, right? So it's our personal health, our relational health, our spiritual health. Second category is results. These are your main things. This is mission critical. It's top priority. It's your unique abilities. These are the things that you've been uniquely called to do as a pastor, right? That's the stuff we talked about earlier. This is results time. Thirdly, response time. This is all that other stuff. This is cleanup, this is follow-up, this is admin, this is meetings, this is returning calls. It's responding to things, right? Results is a lot more proactive, response is more reactive. And then finally, refocus. Part of the rhythms of healthy time management is it's not a one and done deal. You don't make a list and then never come back to it. You have to revisit things. You have to be constantly evaluating and rejuggling things because life changes, right? And interruptions happen. So you have to be constantly evaluating and planning. And so you need to have some time in every week, and really I'd say every day, where you kind of revisit that list and refocus your priorities to move forward. Now, these are 4 important time blocks that I would say are really wise to build into your calendar. Something else to keep in mind is, as you think about productivity, it's not only managing your time, it's also managing your energy and managing your attention. Carey Nieuwhof wrote a little book called At Your Best, and he says this: managing your time is one thing, but real progress comes when leaders manage their energy. And what does he mean by that? Well, you know as well as I do, there are certain times during the day when you're more mentally tuned in than others, when you're more mentally checked out than others. And so he says, begin to understand those rhythms and build your schedule around it. And he says this: number 1, identify when your energy is at its peak. Number 2, rank activities in terms of whether they energize you or drain you. Number 3, do what you're best at when you're at your best. Okay? And there's just some common sense. He says, think about different times of day and different times in 3 categories: low energy, mid energy, and high energy. Okay? Let me just do a quick little summary, raise of hands. How many of you, in terms of your high energy moments, when you are most mentally tuned in, most creative, most productive, how many of you would say that's morning for you? Okay? How many of you would say, no, that's afternoon, that's when I do it? Okay? How many of you would say, it's evening, I'm a night person? Okay? And you might be a combination of all. But understanding your personal rhythms is really helpful. And here's how this all begins to come together. What I would say is design your ideal week. And I'm saying it's ideal because it's not real. There is no such thing as an ideal week, right? You'll put this on paper and it'll look beautiful and you will never live that week, right? But it's still good to have an ideal week. You know, something that you default to, something that if you had, if you were in total control, this would be the most maximally productive way I could spend my time. It's good to think about that. So design your ideal week. And what I would say is, and the handouts I've gotten, I've given you a chart just like this that breaks it down by hour each day. But think in terms of probably chunks about like this. You've got some of those big 2 to 3 to 4 hour chunks that kind of represent your day. You've got that kind of early morning chunk, maybe a couple hours before your workday begins. When you're getting up and you're kind of getting ready for the day, there's a chunk of time. Then you've got your main morning. You've got a couple, 3, 4 hours in the morning there. Then you've got your lunch chunk. And then you've got your afternoon. There's about 2 to 3 hours there. Then in the evening, a dinner chunk. Then you got some time in the evening. And then maybe another little section at the end of the evening, late at night, if you're a night owl or if you're just, things like that. So, again, think about this and go, where am I most tuned in? Where is my high energy, mid-energy, and low energy times in the week? And I'll just show you mine. Okay, this is mine right here. When I wake up in the morning, I'm not a morning person. I'm not really drained. I'm not really tired. I've rested, but my wife will tell you it takes me a little bit to get a conversation going, right? So she knows morning probably isn't the best time to have deep-seated conversations because I'm there, but I'm not tired. I haven't really engaged yet. So that's kind of a mid-energy time for me. Morning, right? About 8 o'clock to through lunch. That's when I do my best thinking. That's when I'm creative. That's when I can really think and problem solve. So that's probably my high energy time. After lunch, man, it deteriorates rapidly for me, right? I start sort of productive early afternoon. By 3 o'clock, I don't even try to do sermon prep like that. I'll just be sitting there staring at a screen because my mind I'm just done, right? So afternoons for me are that low energy time. Then come dinner time, I get a little second wind. I'm probably mid energy. For me, I am a night owl. About 9 o'clock, I catch a second wind. I'm very productive in the evening. In fact, I have to make myself go to bed. I can stay up till 1, 2, 3 in the morning, and I'm just getting stuff done. So if you get an email from me late at night, I've just confessed my sins there, but that's the reality. So this is sort of my rhythm. Now, if you think about this, Kate, now let's combine that with the other concept. Rest, results, response, refocus. When would you probably want to do your results? The mission critical things, the most important things. High energy, mid energy, low energy. The green zone, the yellow zone, the red zone. When would you want to do results? Probably in your green zone, yeah. So for me, that meant I usually spent my mornings doing sermon prep, doing strategic planning, doing creative thinking, doing writing. That was the most productive time for me. That was my results time, right? Mid-energy, what's that good for? Well, I would say that's probably good for rest, when you don't need to be super mentally engaged, but you want to be there, right? And so like my early morning, that was times when I would do I'd exercise, I'd spend time with the Lord, do devotions, get showered, get ready, right? And so you don't need to be super creative and tuned in for that, but you need to be there mentally. And so that was a time where I could rest and just give some attention to my physical and spiritual health. Same thing in the evening when I'm there with my family, right? I don't need to be super creative or strategic when I'm hanging out with friends and family, but I need to have some energy, so that's good mid-energy stuff. And then low energy, for me, that was meetings, admin, phone calls, emails, that kind of stuff. If I'm just sitting looking at a screen, I'm not getting anything done, but if somebody's across the table from me, yeah, I can be engaged in that. So I tended to schedule a lot of meetings in the afternoon. I didn't schedule many, if any, meetings in the morning if I could avoid it, because that's my most productive creative thinking time. I saved that for later, right? And so you begin building your schedule around this kind of thing. So yeah, that's what it looked like for me. Rest was that kind of early morning time, physical, spiritual fitness, kind of daily spiritual disciplines, results in the morning, response in the afternoon, again, some rest in the evening. And then in the evenings was not only results time, because I could get stuff done, but refocus time, where every day at the end of the day, I would preview, okay, here's what I got done, here's what I didn't get done. So let's revise this plan and make a plan for tomorrow, right? And here's my big 3. And the beauty of doing that the night before is when you hit the ground running at 8 o'clock in the morning or whenever you get into your office or whenever you start your workday, you're not spending the next 30 to 40 minutes trying to figure out what you're going to do for the day. You can hit the ground running and get at it, right? Because you've already thought about that. So this is where just knowing yourself and knowing your rhythms and thinking about these time blocks can really help you be more productive. And so again, as I look at my ideal week as a pastor when I was there, this isn't probably all that carefully thought out. I just kind of punched this out quickly. But, Sundays, of course, I'd had worship services. That was in my green zone, gratefully, so I'm preaching and teaching. We'd have lunch, sometimes at home as a family, sometimes with other people. Oftentimes, I would do meetings on Sunday afternoon. Sometimes we had occasional elder meetings on Sunday afternoons. We'd do newcomers' lunches. We would do new member meetings. Sometimes we'd do training for people. And then in the evening, we'd have dinner. Our small group that we were part of met twice a month on Sundays, so we would either meet on Sunday night or that would be family time, right? And if you look at those response results, that fits those categories, right? Mondays was my Sabbath. Mondays was my day off. And so I would start the day, doing some exercise, doing some devotions, shower. And then my weekly rhythm was I would get in a car. I pray best when I'm moving. And so I would get in a car and I would drive for about an hour. And I had some beautiful country roads by my home, and I would just drive for an hour. And I had a structured way to do that using the Lord's Prayer. And man, that was just so rejuvenating for me. I came to just look forward to that 1 hour drive in the country, right, where I just spend time with the Lord, right? And then I'd come home and I'd sort of plan my week. And I'd look at, okay, what do I want to accomplish this week from my monthly to-do list? What are the big 3 that I want to do? I'd have lunch at home. In the afternoon, I did kind of whatever I wanted. I'd typically knock out some email, some home projects. This is typically when I would mow the lawn. I might do some church projects. I wasn't super legalistic about I can't do anything related to church on my Monday. But for me, Sabbath was just a day when I gave myself permission to move a little more slowly, right? Because I tend to be moving all the time. I tend to be a pretty kind of get things done kind of person. And on Monday, I would just give myself to get things done, but just move a little more slowly and spend a little extra time with the Lord and just kind of breathe and enjoy life a little bit. So I was still productive, but that was my Monday. And then in the evening, I would spend time with family and do some home admin stuff, pay bills, things like that. And then before I went to bed, I would get some work done and plan the next day. Tuesdays for me were typically the same thing. Exercise, devotion, shower in the morning. Tuesday mornings, my morning time was typically, I would always devote some time to sermon prep. But then on Tuesdays, I would do staff meeting prep because we had staff meetings Tuesday afternoon. So I would always go, hey, what do I need to be thinking about for each staff person? What are our objectives? How can I lead my staff well? And then in the afternoon, we would have a staff meeting. And I also then would try to get maybe 1 or 2 or 3 other appointments in on the afternoon and try to pack all those appointments in together, right? Wednesdays, I typically worked from home, and I can explain to you why I did that, but that was really helpful for me just to be at home, away from phones and things like that. And I would really work on, Wednesday was my strategic planning, my sermon productive day. This was my creative thinking day, and then Thursday, I would, again, my typical meeting times and admin times were Tuesdays, Thursdays. I'd try to pack it in on Thursdays, and then Fridays, I would do sermon prep in the morning, and then in the afternoon, I just left that flexible. I knew that my tendency is to plan more than I think I can do in the course of a week. And just knowing that, I'm like, okay, I'm only going to plan about 4.5 days, 5.5 days, and leave that buffer time. And invariably for me, it ended up being sermon prep because I was never quite as far down as I thought I should be. But at least I had that buffer to do that, right? So you just get to know yourself. And then Saturday, Elvie and I would usually go get coffee, go for a drive, maybe go for a walk. I would typically on Saturday mornings go up to the church when nobody was up there, and I would just kind of think out loud, walk around the auditorium, and just kind of think through my sermon, process it for a little bit. And then I'd be home in the afternoon, do family home projects, and then family time, and then before I went to bed, I'd review my sermon. And so, I mean, this will look different for you, but you figure out what works for you, right? What time am I done here? How are we doing for time? I got 15 minutes. Okay, we're in good shape. But yeah, and the way that Wednesday at home came to be is before we had a church building, we had office space before we had a worship space, and we rented in a corporate office building, and the space that we had was a big open space in the middle surrounded by offices, and so we could use that middle space for worship team rehearsals or little small group Bible studies, and they began using that for Wednesday women's Bible studies. And they discovered that, hey, we could have our women's Bible study at a conference room down the hall and put our little kids in the main room in the center area and have childcare in the middle. So that was every Wednesday morning. And so I'd go into the office on Wednesday mornings, and these little toy tricycles would be bumping up against my door and kids screaming. And I'm like, I'm not getting anything done. So from that point on, I said, I'm going to work from home on Wednesdays, right? And everybody understood why, right? Nobody judged me for that. But the funny thing is, once we got a building, I found that I really enjoyed that rhythm. And I was so productive just having one day at home, away from the office, away from drop-ins, and it really worked for me. And that's how I work. If you look at my personality, I'm an introvert, extrovert. I'm right on the middle line. And so I love spending time with people, but if I spend a ton of time with people, I'm ready for a break. I got to re-energize and get some time by myself. And then after I do that, I'm ready to engage again. So that rhythm was perfect. Tuesdays, I would pack it in with meetings. Wednesdays, I'm home just doing creative thinking stuff. Thursdays, I'm back at it, meeting with people. And so just know yourself. My predecessor, Bob Rowley, in this district superintendent role, he would sometimes travel, every other day in the course of a week, 2-3 times. And I'm like, no. So the way I've done it is I've made it a goal to I'll just pack in a bunch of travel in the course of an entire week, and then I'm home for a week, right? And that's just how I work. But get to know your rhythms, get to know your energy, and when you figure that out, it starts feeling good, right? So give some thought to how you work and how you work best. Intentional living and time management. So if we were to kind of review, just kind of a high-level thing, abandon semi-annually, okay? I would say every 6 months, take some time. Breathe, think, rest, pray. Go before the Lord. Go, what are the big things I should be pursuing right now? Determine your OKRIs, we'll just call them that, and then incorporate them into your master to-do list. You're going to do this every 6 months. What are the big things I should be pursuing for the next 6 months? Then measure monthly. Have a leadership clarity day where maybe for half a day, you're going to go back and revisit those objectives, those key results, and go, hey, how am I doing? You're going to revisit that master to-do list and go, hey, what needs to be done this month? You're going to create a separate list for that month, and you're going to identify your big three. You're going to do the same thing on a weekly basis, maybe on a Sunday night or a Monday morning before the week begins. Evaluate your objectives, key results, review your monthly to-do list, create a to-do list for the coming week, identify your big three, and then batch your tasks and block your time, right? And the nice thing about, by the way, batching your tasks and blocking your time, you don't have to get everything done. You just have to create buckets for when you're going to get certain kinds of things done. And as long as you have those big three identified, get as much done as you can on those types of tasks within that bucket, and you'll be okay, right? You don't have to be rigid in that respect, but those buckets are really, I think, a flexible but effective way to do that. And then divert daily. Every day, I would say maybe the night before, revisit that to-do list, make a plan for the next day, identify your big three, and that way when you wake up the next day, boom, hit the ground running, and you can be productive, okay? This is how this intentional living, I think, can coincide with healthy time management. So, again, it does require some intentionality. But again, we've got 4,000 weeks, right? We'd better be intentional. We'd better think about how we use our time. Now, again, I don't want to get super tool specific, but I'll just mention a couple things. Couple focus tools I've found helpful because I tend to get distracted. Like you give yourself 2 hours of time and it's easy for you in that time to be, oh, I'm checking Twitter or oh, I'm checking, whatever. Couple tools that I found helpful. When I'm having a hard time staying focused, there's an app called Freedom. And it's a pretty cool little app. There's a free version and a paid version. But basically what it'll do is you can designate for X number of minutes or hours or whatever, I will not have access to these apps on my computer or to the internet or to Twitter or whatever, right? and what's funny is when you try to get on the internet, it comes up with a screen that says, hey, you're free, right? Like, you don't have to do this, right? But it's a way to just go, I know myself, I will be given to Twitter if I'm not careful, so I just block that out for a while, and I'm going to work on this. There's another one called Focus. Actually, this is just a tiny little app. There's other ones out there, but it's based on what's called the Pomodoro technique. Have you heard of that? It's basically the idea where you work for 25 minutes, then you take a break for 5 minutes, you work for another 25, you take a break for 5, or you can stretch it out to like 45 and 15. But it's an app that you set it, and you go, okay, I'm going to work for this 25-minute segment, and then it ding, 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 it lets you know when that's done. You get a 5-minute break. It's just ways that you can be intentional to go, okay, I'm going to focus for this moment. And sometimes technology can be your friend, to keep you away from other technologies sometimes. So these are just some things. If you want to know what I use to manage my stuff, I basically use 3 apps. Todoist, I use that to manage my tasks and to kind of batch things together and give priority to things. And there's some really neat filtering stuff that allows you to do some of that so you don't have to rewrite all your lists. Outlook, I use that for email and calendaring, and then OneNote, I use that for note-taking, and I also use that for executing my daily and weekly plans. Maybe another time, if there's time later, we can show you exactly how that works, but the tool doesn't matter, right? A legal pad you can do this with, right? Find a tool that works for you. It's the process that's important, not the particular tool. Now, again, this may look like a lot of work. It may look like, man, that takes a lot of energy. But I like what Cal Newport said. He wrote a book called Deep Work, Rules for Focused Success in a Distracted World. He said, sometimes people ask why I bother with such a detailed level of planning. My answer is simple. It generates a massive amount of productivity. A 40-hour, time-blocked work week, I estimate, produces the same amount of output as a 60-plus-hour work week pursued without structure. And I think he's right. If you want to redeem your time, as Ephesians says, if you want to number your days and make the most of your time, then periodically you're going to have to pause and think about how you're using your time and reevaluate and change up your plans and just make sure you're being strategic moving forward and create those blocks. And will those things get interrupted? Yeah, they will. But if you've got blocks of time and some general rhythms, they won't devastate you because you still have a plan moving forward. You can adjust that plan. There's flexibility in it. So here's the thing. We got a lot of different guys in this room. Some of you guys, I suspect, probably need to work harder, okay? Listen, let's be honest. Ministry is a great place for lazy people to hide out. Because nobody really knows how you spend your time as a pastor, right? You really are self-managed. And if you wanted to just kind of blow your time and be unproductive, there are probably very few people that would know you're doing that. So, that's a danger I think we all need to think about. I was talking to a fellow district superintendent, and he was expressing a level of frustration. He's like, man, some of my young pastors, he said, They'll take their kids to school in the morning, then they'll just leisurely grab a cup of coffee. They don't really start their workday until about 9:30 in the morning, and then it's time to pick their kids up again at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and then they're done for the day, right? And I'm like, okay, great. If you're getting paid part-time, and if that's what you've negotiated with your church, where you're going to work 20 hours, that's perfect. But if they're paying you full-time to do a job, guess what? That's wrong, right? And so often we can get a little slovenly in terms of how we do things. And if we really actually budget our time, some of us might be surprised at how little we're actually working, because ministry is flexible and we can take advantage of that flexibility. So the reality is some of you might need to work harder. You might just look at that and go, I've gotten a little bit sluggardly. The Bible does talk about that. We need to work hard, right? The souls of men and the glory of God is at stake. We have 4,000 weeks. We need to get at it, and we need to work harder. But we also need to work smarter in that, right? And there's some of you that might have the opposite problem. You're working way too much, right? And you're doing too much. And this is just may seem overwhelming to you because you're like, man, oh my goodness, it just sounds so complicated. And I just want to take a little bit of pressure off. I want to put a little pressure on because some of you guys might need a little bit of healthy pressure, but I also want to take some pressure off for those of you that might be like, oh, this sounds so overwhelming. It is overwhelming, right? And we live in a fallen world. There are thorns and thistles. We have to work hard. It will always be hard, but we have to be effective. We have to be efficient. And in the midst of it all, will we drop some balls? Absolutely. Will we come face to face with our own finitude, with our own weakness, with our own finite, flawed nature as creatures? Yes. And you know what? That's healthy when that happens. In fact, that's not a bug. That's a feature. That's partly how God designed ministry. And so I want to end with a quote. It's a lengthy quote, but I think it gives balance to what we've been talking about here. Richard Bauckham wrote a great little article called "Weakness: Paul's and Ours." And he talks about the passage where Paul is talking about the thorn in the flesh and his weakness and all the things that he's gone through. And he says this, and I hope this can both resonate with you and maybe encourage you. Anyone who throws himself into the work of Christian ministry of any kind with half the dedication of Paul will experience the weakness of which Paul speaks. The times when problems seem insoluble, the times of weariness from sheer overwork, the times of depression when there seems to be no results, the emotional exhaustion which pastoral concern can bring on. In short, all the times when the Christian minister or worker knows he has stretched to the limits of his capacities for a task which is very nearly, but by God's grace not quite, too much for him. Anyone who knows only his strength, not his weakness, has never given himself to a task which demands all he can give. There's no avoiding this weakness, and we should learn to suspect those models of human life which try to avoid it. We should not be taken in by the ideal of the charismatic Superman, for whom the Holy Spirit is a constant source of superhuman strength. Nor should we fall for the ideal of the modern secular Superman, the man who organizes his whole life with the object of maintaining his own physical and mental well-being, who keeps up the impression of strength because he keeps his life well within the limits of what he can easily cope with. Such a man is never weak, because he's never affected, he's never concerned, he's never involved or committed beyond a cautiously safe limit. That was neither Jesus' ideal of life nor Paul's. To be controlled by the love of Christ means inevitably to reach the limits of one's abilities and experience weakness. Of course, I'm not suggesting that the Christian minister should not take sensible precautions against overwork or reasonable steps to maintain his physical and mental health. Nor am I suggesting he should not do his best to be efficient in his work. He owes it to his Lord to do so. But a Pauline perspective on Christian service takes us further than that. The Christian minister should be sensible, but above all, he must be wholehearted. He should try to be efficient, but even when his efficiency runs out, the effectiveness of his ministry need not do so. His efficiency may actually sometimes need to run out, by necessity, not neglect, if the power of Christ is to prove effective in his ministry. There'll be days, there'll be moments, there'll be weeks when you feel very inefficient, very unproductive, very weak. And you know what? Sometimes it's in those weeks, sometimes those months that God does his best work. Okay? Because it's in our weakness that his strength is most seen. That's not an excuse not to be effective or efficient, but it does help hopefully give some balance to this whole thing. So let's strive, by the glory of God, to be effective and efficient for His glory and for His kingdom, for the sake of the people we've been called to serve. But at the end of the day, let's realize, it's Him that we serve. He's in control of time. We're, at the end of the day, not our manager of our time. We're just stewards of whatever He chooses to do with us, right? And let's be effective. Let's be efficient for the glory of God and trust Him with the outcome. Okay, let me pray, and then we'll have a couple questions, and then we'll break. Father, thank you for the gift of time. It is unwieldy in this fallen world, and yet you've called us to do our best to harness it for your glory. Help us to be intentional, effective as we do that as pastors. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, one question, two questions, and by the way, we'll have a Q&A tomorrow, so if you wanted to save some questions for that. But anything you want to tackle? Jordan. How do you decide what your objectives are?
Yeah, what's important, what's effective. You have to use the term the most strategic.
Yeah.
How do you decide this?
Well, I mean, you're hopefully going to be having conversations with your leadership team, with your elders. You're going to be talking about these things together. And I think in some respects, the Lord has promised us wisdom. James, let anyone who seeks wisdom ask of God, who'll give it to you liberally, right? And in promising us wisdom, he's not promising us answers. Right? He's not promising revelation, like a banner in the sky. He's saying, I'm going to give your brain, your mind, the ability to apply God's word to your situation in the way that's wisest. And do I walk away from every decision going, yeah, that's it. That's the divinely inspired 3. No, I don't. But I'm like, I got to decide something. And as best I can, these are the 3 big ones for me. These are the objectives. And I may be wrong, but if I don't make a decision, nothing's going to happen. And we can easily fall prey to the paralysis of analysis, right? Where we try to make the perfect decision, then we make no decision. So I would say, spend some time thinking, praying about it, get godly wisdom, make a decision, and go with it and stick with it. And trust God that he's given you the wisdom that he promises. Don't put undue pressure on the perfect decision. Always have a bent towards action. Just make some decisions and move. Be decisive.